Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture, online at polarinertia.com, and Medivate, a community and set of tools to help you build the kind of meditation practice you'd like to have, online at medivate.com. How do you describe the sound of this town where we sit and where you live, Canterbury, England? What's the Canterbury sound in your mind?
The Canterbury sound is silence.
Well, we found that, finally.
Finally we have, yeah. No,
we don't want silence in Canterbury. What do we want?
Yeah. Well, Canterbury sound, yeah, is actually... some of you may have heard of it, but back in the 70s, there were a whole bunch of bands that were affiliated with Canterbury, I think is the best thing to say. They didn't exactly live here. And I know that Robert Wyatt, who's one of the great musicians who has a relationship with Canterbury, has always denied that there was ever such a thing as the Canterbury sound. Because, of course, they had to go to London to do anything, But his band Soft Machine and a great band called Caravan, who are still sort of active down here, Egg, Hatfield in the North, a whole bunch of bands that I guess were a particular brand of prog, sort of rock meets jazz, I suppose, rather than rock meets classical, because in a sense, when you think about prog in the 70s, you think of Yes and Genesis, and I think both of those bands had these, sort of classical keyboard players, who sort of dominated proceedings, and the Canterbury bands had these sort of jazz organ players, really. So there was a strong sort of jazz influence, and that's the thing that's persists to this day, actually. And the band that I have here, that's sort of rooted in Canterbury, I suppose, has a strong affiliation with that Canterbury sound. So it's a sort of weird hybrid of the rock music that I've played all my life. My more recent interest in the jazz are sort of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, and yes, and this sort of proggy kind of thing that I guess when I was a kid, I grew up in the 70s really listening to those proggy bands.
You absorb it.
I did, so it's just in the blood, and maybe when you move to Canterbury there's something in the water that makes you write 15-minute epics.
This is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall. We're sitting down in Canterbury, England with Jack Hues, who is known for, two main musical reasons. Number one, as the founding member of the rock group Wang Chung, and as a founding member of the jazz group, the Quartet. You might remember him from a previous interview I did on this show's predecessor, The Marketplace of Ideas. And this time we're going to talk at much less of a distance. Last time was over Skype. This one's here in the town where you live, as you say, Canterbury, with the Canterbury Sound, and a place that brings together rock and jazz, as your career does. The Quartet has a new album coming out this year, and Wang Chung has its latest album from 2012, I believe, Tazer Up. Yeah. You mentioned off mic before that Tazer Up is one of Wang Chung's English albums, as was the first album, which I listened to quite a bit even today, which is the self-titled album, the debut, which is spelled Huang, Chung. But tell me, what makes these bookend albums so far English, and the middle ones, the ones with songs like Dance All Days, Everybody Have Fun Tonight, Mosaic Points on the Curve, Warmer Side of Cool, American.
The American albums, yeah.
Other than where you recorded them, I guess.
Yes, yeah. Well, I suppose technically Points on the Curve could be an English album because, it was all recorded at Abbey Road, actually. And I'm with Chris Hues, who's definitely counts as an English producer. But after that, I think To Live and Die in LA, Mosaic and The Warmer Side of Cool. I definitely see those as the American albums, you know. So they were, you know, recorded in America by and large, with American producers. Again, I guess you could argue Peter Wolf, who produced Mosaic and The Warmer Side of Cool, was actually born in Vienna.
I see.
It's a European.
The Viennese albums.
Yeah, the Viennese albums. So maybe this is all just a lot of rubbish. But I think that, you know, the record companies have a big influence on these things, you know, and, you know, Points on the Curve, those Central albums, American albums, you know, were all out on Geffen Records. And I guess the way they were marketed, the videos that went with them, and the paraphernalia around them was all very much geared around the American market. You know, I mean, that's not how we thought about it at the time, but in retrospect, you see it that way. And Wang Chung was recorded in London, you know, for a sort of the English market in a sense. You know, it was a post-punk album in many ways, and Tazer Up, yeah. Again, you know, Nick and I have been always based in the UK, and the songwriting on that's probably, you know, goes back 5-10 years almost, you know, of songs written in the UK.
And it goes back to, since it goes back that long, it definitely goes back to our previous interview. We were talking about the EP you put out, which has a couple of the songs in slightly different forms that are on Tazer Up. One of them we talked about, London Orbital. It was on that podcast, which it has a whole new meaning now that I've seen the London Orbital, the freeway. I haven't driven on it here, but there are English
on the way in from the airport.
Yes, we passed it, and I came in on the tube. I realized it was up there somewhere, but I've seen the structure itself, I think. In any case, Tazer Up has a song that directly references England like that. But it's. Do you think that something about recording an album in a country other than the one the band got famous in, America, changes the way the music is?
I think it does, yeah. I mean, certainly, like when we were recording say, Points on the Curve, for example, the fact that we recorded at Abbey Road, as opposed to, say, Ocean Way in Los Angeles or the Hit Factory in New York, fundamentally affects the sound of the record, you know. Now, these days, everyone's recording on Pro Tools, and it can't, so everything sort of sounds the same, you know. I guess there's a different sensibility in different cities, but I think back in the 70s and 80s, you definitely noticed, you know, how bands would go to Nashville to record a record, or, you know, Atlanta or something. Do you mean they've got different musical feels about them? You know?
They weren't going to their own bedroom studios.
Exactly, no. And I think that sort of cosmopolitan approach to, you know, going to a city to get the vibe from it. I mean, this is what you're all about in many ways, isn't it?
I guess I'm doing exactly that. So I can't deny any of the mystical properties attributed to that practice, considering that's what I'm expending so much energy to do myself.
Absolutely. Well, I think music is, it's, as we were saying off mic before, music is a language, you know, just like French and English, and and expressing yourself in that language. I think you pick up the stuff around you. I can totally understand why you'd go to New Orleans to make a jazz record, or you know, Woodstock to make a folk record or something. You know, so,
the music as language idea is one that's intriguing me, because I can't really play any instrument well, but I do study languages, and you know, I find even though English is my native language, I get better the more I study. Spanish and Korean are the main ones. But tell me, working with rock and jazz, they feed into each other, especially the way you do them, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I grew up listening to the Beatles when I was a kid. I learned guitar from the age of 8. I was totally obsessed with rock music as a kid. You know, it was just completely that's all I thought about, really. But when I went,
even by the standards of the generation, you were obsessed with rock music.
I was, yeah, and you know, I practiced a lot, and you know, that was my life, really, you know. And then when I left school, I guess my parents wanted me to go to university, and so I wanted to do music at university, but in those days you could only study classical music. So I started listening to a lot of classical stuff and really got into it. You know, I can remember the lecture I had on Mozart's 40th Symphony, where the light really went on for me about that sort of three-dimensional musical thinking.
The connections lit up with the music you had been listening to before, then.
It did, yeah. But also the music, you know, one of my favourite stories actually is about George Gershwin travelling to Europe, you know, when he sort of made it, really, and was a famous composer, very successful composer. And he went to Maurice Ravel in Paris and to get lessons. And Ravel refused to teach him because he said, you should be teaching me because you've made all this money out of music and I haven't, Right. But he then went on to Vienna and met with Alban Berg. And Berg, this would have been, I guess, in the sort of early 30s. And I think Berg had just finished the lyric suite and arranged a performance of it in his house for George Gershwin and his sort of entourage, So, I don't know if your listeners know about Alban Berg and his music, but it's pretty intense, sort of expressionistic Viennese stuff, but amazing, amazing music. And the lyric suite is one of his most beautiful pieces. So one can imagine being in this beautiful Viennese house, with Berg and his wife and, and this performance, and Gershwin's just sort of blown away by it, And at the end of the performance, Berg said to George Gershwin, so Mr. Gershwin, play us some of your music. And George Gershwin was like, I can't just sit and play Get Happy or something, after this, do you know what I mean? And Berg said to him, but Mr. Gershwin, music is music. And that's what I think, that music is music. So whether you're playing jazz, rock, classical, in a sense, the nuts and bolts of what you're doing is music. And from when I'm chatting with my students, I teach at the university here in Canterbury, or one of the universities in Canterbury, and teach songwriting. And, we sort of do a lot of talking. And in the first classes, I was sort of saying, tell me about the music you listen to. And I notice a lot these days students will say, well, I listen to a lot of metal and a lot of hip hop, and and they talk about these genres. And I say, you're talking... not rubbish, but don't talk to me about genre. Talk to me about artists.
Right.
Because
put up those walls.
Exactly. Genre, it's meaningless. It's just a librarian mentality of grouping stuff together. And music for me is about artists who essentially create genres.
Right.
So, the artists I'm interested in are Miles Davis and Alban Berg and the Beatles. And,
right.
So for me, music is the core language sort of linking, that informs all of that stuff,
Right.
And genre is really just an illusion.
Right.
I think, if this is a very long answer to your question.
Genre is an illusion that holds such sway. I mean,
well, it does.
I
too
think
much sway,
too much sway.
And
yes.
bands that are defined by genre, I think,
Right.
rethink.
It's even worse than bands being defined by genre, but listeners defining themselves by a genre. Especially this happens when, in the teenage years. I remember in high school, you'd pick a genre and you'd have to ally yourself with it, and all the other genres were inferior because you picked the one. I mean, it sounds like you found a way out of that in your own years because you were so music obsessed, I suppose. You couldn't have been linked to one genre, else you wouldn't have developed.
No. And also, I think growing up with the Beatles, they, Sgt. Pepper, which is supposedly this concept album, which implies that it's somehow unified, has got a, when I'm 64, pastiche of a sort of 20s track, which is preceded by Within You Without You, a sort of Indian raga, which, is followed by Lovely Rita and Lucy in the Sky and With a Little Help from My Friends, which is a Joe Cocker cover. It's like the Beatles use genre like masks, like persona, right. Things that they would just put on and take off at will, and that's how I see it really, Now, having said that, the stuff that I write for the Quartet would not appear on a Wang Chung album,
right.
and vice versa.
There's the boundary isn't a solid one in the middle, but there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the Wang Chung end, the Quartet end, and you go back and forth.
Yeah, you do. What I'm talking about is the artist's perspective, probably. From the marketplace perspective, genre is a very useful way of dividing things up so that people can figure out what it is they want to choose, you know. So yes, when you're trying to sell your work, thinking about genre is important, I guess, you know, and making sure that you don't spill out too far. But in a way, I think with Wang Chung, one of the reasons that the band was so hard to pin down and why it remains sort of unclear whether Wang Chung's a rock band or what does Wang Chung mean? The big question. Is because I think on the albums you do get a lot of different approaches, and even Tazer Up, you've got a piano ballad and a stargazing, which is like a sort of Pink Floyd homage, yes. And, City of Light, which is a sort of like a post-Beatles rock tune, and so we still kind of mess around with genre, sort of genre bending, and I kind of feel that's a great thing to be doing, and not a sign of shallowness at all.
Yes. And listeners, as I mentioned, there's discussions of a few songs in the previous interview on the old show, The Marketplace of Ideas. That song, Stargazing, we get into quite a bit as well. But City of Light, which was not on the EP, it's on the new one, Tazer Up. It, as a reference, I was surprised to hear, but it's, you like to make these cultural connections. You mentioned the novels of Haruki Murakami. Yes. Are you a reader of his, as I am?
I have read, I can't remember the name of it. I really didn't enjoy it, actually, but my daughter Violet said, you must read
Norwegian Wood?
No, it wasn't that one.
I could name the other dozen, but we just, I mean...
The bird sings or something, that something bird sings, is it all that?
In any case, you read a Murakami novel on the suggestion of your daughter, didn't much enjoy it, but it found its way into the song.
It did, just the number of syllables in Haruki Murakami, it sort of worked out,
Almost more interesting than a cultural reference from about something you love. It's a cultural reference about something you just happened to encounter and worked it in. I mean, that's how often does that happen when you're writing a song where you pull things that are relevant in a sort of sideways, oblique way to you?
I think all the time, actually. I'm quite into the sort of collage mentality. That's something that's definitely informing my latest work with the Quartet. And collaging together things that are just happening, regardless of whether you like them or not.
Right.
So,
how far back does the Quartet go in the form that you have it now?
Well, I guess I sort of started it. I mean, this may sound utterly pretentious, really, to be putting it quite like this, but I know around 9/11. Obviously, it had a huge impact on everything and everybody. And I was writing, songs, as I always was. And I wrote a song, not about that exactly, but in reaction to that. And I just thought, this is so useless, this song. Just as a mode of expression, it just seemed completely inadequate.
Wow.
And particularly the words in the song. I felt like after 9/11, words became utterly meaningless. The way they were used in the media about it, and the way people, I can't. So I got sort of, I just wanted to start writing instrumental music, and that's what the Quartet coincided with me moving here to Canterbury. And meeting some musicians who were essentially jazz musicians, improvising musicians. And we started hanging out together and just playing some monk tunes and stuff. And I was very interested in Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis at that point, as composers, really, And partly because I think at all times in my musical career, I found playing a real challenge, and writing my own music was a way of kind of being able to play some stuff,
Right, you could write to your own ability to play.
Exactly. So, so I started writing this stuff, and my sort of creativity sort of opened up again from being a kind of shut down around songwriting and stuff for a while. I found that every time I sat down with the guitar or piano, I came up with a new tune, and I was writing a lot of music. And so the Quartet was really developed as a vehicle for my writing. And so my piano player, Sam Bailey, amazing musician, very free, incredibly talented player. And then at various times we work with the drummers and bass players, different guys, and with jazz musicians, you're working with musicians who are incredibly talented and disciplined and highly trained, I read Bill Bruford's autobiography recently, and he really makes this point about, working with Yes, and then working with jazz musicians, and how with his jazz guys, they'll be on a plane to somewhere to do a gig, and they'll be like reading the score of some piece that they're going to be doing like tomorrow, and writing some music for an arrangement they're doing here, and and they sort of arrive and play your set at sight, for like 200 quid or something on to the next gig, and he was sort of saying, with Yes, Chris Squire would barely have set up his bass rig in the time it takes these guys to sort of learn a piece, and so very different. They
have a system around them. Each individual one has built their system, and they're working in it.
Yeah, and they're hard-working musicians, they're grafting musicians, and if it were a fair world, they'd all be household names, because such talent, Dave Smith, his drummer I work with, he now works with Robert Plant, actually, so he's sort of got a nice gig there. But Dave is a phenomenal musician, very engrossed in African music and makes regular trips to Africa to work with African drummers and stuff. And amazing drummer. Tom Mason, the bass player, superb, These days, I'm working with two musicians from a band called Lead Bib. Lead Bib are an English sort of avant-garde jazz band, I suppose, who actually won the Mercury Prize a few years ago with one of their albums. Mark Hollab on drums and Liran Donin on bass. So they're very free guys. I was saying again before we started the interview, they're the sort of musicians where if you give them music, they kind of look a bit pissed off, really, sort of thing. But if you sort of say, well, let's do this, and give them a lot of space, then...
you just wanted somebody to play this, I see. You could have,
Yeah, so that's good. As a composer, your job is to get out of the way. And that's a good thing for a composer to do, actually, I think.
It's been 3 weeks now since we left our tears at the check-in row. Just a kiss on the cheek now. I should have held you longer, but I let go. It's the strangest feeling, coming home to wait for the phone to sing. It's become our world now, a big dial-up code and a longer ring. Don't fly this low, it was a strange hello, I know. And when I call back, just say you love me. Justify your tone, tell me you're alone, keep things clear for me, kiss my mind and dry my eyes, please. Justify your tone, tell me you're alone, keep things clear for me, kiss my mind and dry my eyes, please.
The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle was probably... That's it. I don't know why that came to mind right then. I wasn't even thinking about it. When you don't think about it, it comes to you. I mean, that's a little... There's an analogy to that in music, right? You have to... You do have to approach things in a sort of oblique manner before you can really... Is that true? Does it hold up?
So true. My songwriting students, I say to them, if you take the approach of, I got a bit of time next Wednesday, I'm going to sit down for a couple of hours and write a song, you'll still have that blank piece of paper in front of you at the end of the 2 hours. But when you're riding on a bus or waiting for your girlfriend to get ready to go out or something, that's when the idea for a song will come to you. So you need your iPhone with you at all times, or whatever Android device you have, and more conventionally a sort of notebook of some sort, so that, because the ideas come at the least expected times, when your conscious mind is suspended, really,
It's an advantage of the age where we have iPhones, Androids, and what have you, devices to record as we go, even if we're just humming into a recorder, It's something that helps when you, especially, are working down a number of creative avenues, when your mind could be in a variety of places. You need to capture what you can, as you can, when you can. Tell me, what are the other advantages this era affords you when you do work in the world of Wang Chung and the world of the Quartet? I mean, I imagine in the 80s when Wang Chung was taking off, you had to be the Wang Chung guy all the time, or else it wasn't going to take off. Yeah. Now you can. Is it because you're just more advanced in your career now, or is it because the landscape is different enough that you can actually do two projects that are ostensibly that disparate?
Yeah, I think it's to do with where I am at my age and my career as well. I mean, Wang Chung is not a full-time job by any means.
It was probably 1,000% time in 1985.
It was a lifestyle. Sort of,
The Wang Chung lifestyle. What were the elements of the Wang Chung lifestyle?
Writing hits. I think was the first priority. And in trying to enjoy the journey, I think, rather than getting stressed out by it. Yeah. No, I think, where I am now, I have enough time to do those two things, and do the lecturing. It's good, those 3 points of my
Wang Chung, the quartet, and the teaching of songwriting.
Yeah, those 3 things. That's what take my time. That takes my time, and each one is a kind of stimulates the other in a way. And,
without one of those, the other two suffer. In other words.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, and being able to sort of interact with younger people. I mean, because as all teachers know, you get really more back from the students than you're able to give. So
you try to equalize the balance, but you're always going to learn more yourself.
You do, yeah, you really do. And so they'll play me stuff, that they're listening to, and as we were talking to earlier, the way they react to music I'm playing them, and their views of things. It's just really interesting as an exchange, and it really is an exchange.
Those couple of hours ago, you mentioned an American student you had who was thrilled that he had the guy from Wang Chung as his professor and was telling his friends back in America, never going to believe this. Did that student, or do students like him come to you with questions about the actual mechanical, technical elements of those songs that they love of Wang Chung's? Like, can you tell me how you wrote this, or what's going on? Are there Wang Chung related questions you get from students, in other words?
There was from him, yeah, because he sort of knew about it. But I think students obviously kind of check me out, on Google or whatever.
Right. Due diligence in this era.
Yeah. But they're actually, because we're in England, everyone's still pretty reserved. So I don't know whether they think it's like bad taste or something to ask me about dance all days, but they really do. It's sometimes they'll ask about it, but I think they're for better or worse, they're sort of interested in success. How do you become successful? To which there is no easy answer. Apart from irritating ones like just keep working at your scales.
They might ask, how did you why did you use those chords in Chinese Girls, but how did you get on MTV so much?
Exactly right. That's what really interests them, I think.
I see. Yeah. And it does fascinate me when you do get the technical questions about the Wang Chung stuff. When it's in other words, when it's songs that are about songs, when it's questions about the craft of songs that a lot of people just listen to without thinking about the craft of them. What are the questions about?
It's interesting because when I am talking about songwriting, I talk about it in quite a technical way, really. I talk about structure, and I talk about harmony, and I talk about flat supertonics and modulations and all of this stuff. And I know some of the students find it really hard to even begin to think about music in that way because they're so wrapped up in music as feeling.
Even the musicians.
Yeah. I mean, you have guys who are sort of, obsessive guitarists and stuff, and they're much more likely to want to talk about Mixolydian modes and stuff.
It's a guitarist thing.
Yeah, which I still don't understand myself.
Right. I never got that down, even studying guitar.
I never did. But, no, I think especially the songwriters, it's interesting, there's certain, students, who'll sit down and play you a song. A girl did it for me yesterday. Played me this song. It was just like a perfect pop song, with an intro, a verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus, outro.
Platonic ideal pop song.
Exactly. And I said, so why did you write it like that? And she's like, I don't know. She doesn't understand the process at all.
And she's heard so many pop songs so many times. It became her brain's instinctive framework of a song. And so, of course, this is a song.
Yeah. And, a lot of, what I talk about is that these, if you like, songs are full of signposts and signifiers and stuff, musical ones, that we unconsciously read. Even the least literate musical people are aware of the tension and relax in the way a song progresses. Right. And as a writer, you have to sort of respect that shape. You don't have to use it necessarily, but if you're not using it, then you're in a different kind of tension with all of that, Right. So it's, just fascinating. The whole area of songwriting, especially in 2014, where it's, you're really looking, well, we were saying, isn't it, 50 years ago this week that the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, which, you could probably add 10 years back on that, with Elvis and stuff, do you know what I mean? So let's say 60 years of, the history of rock and roll songwriting, so that's not even beginning to include Gershwin and Irving Berlin and all those great writers, it's an incredible sort of legacy and language, if you like, that's built up that we all tacitly understand, but probably would find very hard to talk about in a language other than one of emotions and probably also of lyrics and what the lyrics mean and all of that stuff. Interestingly, in my classes, I rarely ever talk about lyrics.
I see. It's not the most important part of what you want to convey.
Well, I think it's very personal what lyrics mean, whereas the music is more a shared language. I think that's what I think, but I get that. A lot of people might see it the other way around, that the lyrics are in English, isn't that the shared language? But I don't think so.
There's a sense in which the meaning, not the meaning, but the sound, the actual music of a song, and the sound of a song, that is a more direct form of communication than the lyrics, which it seems like the finest lyrics are all pitched so that everybody interprets them differently. Yeah. Whereas the actual music, it seems like people interpret that more similarly. Does that make sense?
Total sense to me, yeah. Growing up listening to the Beatles, again, you're confronted with them, sometimes with a lyric that is deeply profound, like, say, Eleanor Rigby, maybe, and sometimes utterly banal, but always the colour of the words, the colour of the sound of the words syncs perfectly with the colour of the sound of the music. They're kind of linked in a really sort of alchemical kind of way, I think, and which is, I think, part of the appeal of pop music across, national boundaries and cultures and languages and stuff. That there's something about the musicality of the way the English language sounds in those songs, and with a lot of pop music, actually, I remember being in Italy with Bill Friedkin, actually, at this film festival, and there was a girl who was sort of looking after us, taking us from the hotel to the venue where we were doing these talks and stuff, And Italy, of course, the home of opera and of musical language, and instructions on a music score are all in Italian. It's the musical language. But she said to me, "Oh, English, it's such a musical language." And I thought, well, surely that's not right. Am I supposed to be saying that to you? Right. But for her, growing up with English American pop music, this was this sort of, English was this romantic language of music and love and sentimental ideas, I think it's really interesting when I think of English as this sort of slightly military language of instructions and how to put a washing machine together and stuff.
If you just look in the framework of pop music, English mainly conveys some pretty simple ideas. I mean, it's not exactly a complex language.
Yeah, but obviously the music, as music does, spins it out into something very, very beautiful, And I think it's a whole unexplored area. This, I think, of where, I notice it a lot. When you read English critics, journalists, talking about music, they nearly always talk about lyrics and what a song means, And I find it so off the mark, really, that. Because that's not important. it's what the song is musically.
It's that, yes. And it's, if you're going to talk about lyrics, I mean, I'd be kind of interested in hearing how somebody interpreted lyrics and framing it in that this is what these lyrics made me think, but this is what they mean.
Yeah.
It seems like the Achilles heel of American rock critics. It's like, well, I mean, why are you spending so many words on that?
Yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, maybe Dylan's Masters of War or something, you can talk about what that song means, but even that song is full of this kind of oblique imagery, And I think, as Dylan progressed, on to say Blonde on Blonde, that's a record that's full of, deliberately surreal imagery that I think his fans were still desperately trying to interpret as if it was as kind of literally meaningful as some of the earlier songs, He was very playful with all of that, I think.
I'm thinking, let's get the translation right, shall we? Habite, from habitation. I look at politics and stones and use the word advisedly. I use the word advisedly.
Dreamt away at the keyboard the idea of a city.
And so the song kicks on. I think I'll take that tuna sandwich now, please. And then maybe later we'll come up with some kind of plan. Since this is serious and you're so well dressed, shoes shined like your life depended on it. In the rubble, maintenant en français, oui, c'est grave. You say the word grave advisedly. There is no word for all in English. Standing, watching the traffic, waiting for the agencies to show tout le monde, waiting for the world to show.
Eclipses
Outside
lead
your
to
doorstep,
ellipses in equal
like
measure.
lilac,
Darkness,
like
the city,
standing still
locked
and
up
walking,
the road.
waiting
We
while
have
the
given them our
dogwood
heart,
at
which
your
is no
garden
more than
door.
a pale song.
Which it doesn't
This is not
have to be. The way the lyrics then prove uninvited, lilac,
Vitesse is
waiting
after a few nights of lyricism, the work the joint manifesto.
some kind of presidency one by one. I am no recipient of culture. It's an agency thing. I listen to Jarvis contemplating
In equal measure.
and the occasion singing.
The stars have the control out of order, stamp stars.
Jarvis plays Olsen. I had to learn the simplest things last. Not an ocean stretching out beneath my feet. Just let it zip by thing. Crossing somewhere. Making an agreement. Following the language. Through.
The age of rolling news and its butchery. No position for decision making in the democratic process. Even when one is wearing a bright new coat. Everyone sounds true. The dead people sounds like a lot of almost round. Spencer Partridge's Engine Physics. Traffic Alice
Now, you get at something interesting here, which is it's something I think about a lot with music, which is people are so passionate about the music they like. And especially, as we say, growing up, you ally yourself with certain musics or artists and you defend them until you grow up a little bit more. But you still like them, ultimately. Sometimes you turn your back, but rarely do you really turn your back on music you love. It's difficult to, I don't know if this is the right word, to sell even a friend on your favorite music, to try to get them to come over to enjoy it in the way you do. Especially if you're trying to tell them why it's good, trying to say why it's interesting. I tend to frame it in terms of this is why this is more interesting than something else. I'll play the first Wang Chung album, which not many people who I know have heard, because you kind of have to go out of your way to get it. And as I said, friends would react saying it sounded like the Police, but more interesting. And then I would start describing it as that before playing it to other friends. And we were discussing this, you and I. You mentioned, well, the harmonies are a little bit unusual by that type of rock music. And now that's how I'm going to say it is, I'll say what a chord is if they don't know what a chord is, and say, well, it's just a different selection of harmonies, of chords. Listen out for that. That's what's making it more interesting. I mean, what have you found about how best to describe to students or anyone else what makes some music more interesting than others?
That's a good question, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, there's a certain sort of density of information, isn't it, in a way? We were talking about, that first James Blunt album. Sorry to single him out, but, not that I had spent a lot of time listening to that record, but hearing some of the singles, I was struck by the fact that those songs were all built out of major, minor chords.
That the simplest, most common chords.
Basic 3 fingers on the piano type chords, And that this, for me, sounded very bland and uninteresting, Whereas, say, Supper's Ready by Genesis, still to me, is fascinating because of the sort of harmonic complexity of it and density of it. I mean, I guess it's a sort of silly example in some ways because it's such an amazingly long form piece and manages to be coherent and all of that stuff, but I guess to go back to the Beatles again, do you know what I mean? The harmonic density, if you like, of Strawberry Fields Forever, the chord that plays on, Nothing Is Real, Strawberry Fields, that chord, Nothing Is Real, that chord, that diminished chord. That's still a very mysterious chord, I think, and says far more about what John Lennon's trying to say than the words do. The words kind of give you a superficial sense of nothing is real, but the music really illustrates it for you, in a deep way, and the sonority of that chord as well as it's played, So, so that's why I'm interested in music, I think music is a very kind of a language really able to communicate some complex ideas very directly, and I still am a student of that, I think.
Nowadays, when you listen to the first wave of Wang Chung albums and you listen to some of the, shall we say, more interesting harmonies, more unusual chords you use on there, it gives it, as I put it, sort of a darker, more pensive atmosphere than much of what was on the charts at the time. And now we can see that, we can hear that more clearly. It stands out from other, quote unquote, 80s music. But, I wonder whether to call the 80s a time that was overall not very receptive to darker rock music, or was it? Because I think of the early 80s with the sort of Devo and Talking Heads and whatnot, and I think of the atmosphere of tension and anxiety that they would thrive in those days. Is it right to talk about the 1980s as a whole for an era of music? And secondly, what was it one that was receptive or not so receptive to the sort of darker side of things in the pop world?
I think the whole idea of the 80s, the 70s, that they're convenient ways of thinking about music, and one's mind does sort of block them out in that way, sort of divide them up in a way. But it's probably much more continuous than we like to imagine. And I think as well,
and 1980 and 1989 have little similarity if you put them next to each other.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's more to do with people who, where they are with music in a sense, And some people, I think, in general terms, I don't know. I think at the time, commercial music, the music that's in the forefront, as it were, whether we're talking about, X Factor type stuff, or One Direction, or No Direction, as I like to call it.
But seeing a few cardboard cutouts of them around England, they're not so well known. Maybe they're known in the States, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, but, they're the current pop-tastic group, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And mass appeal, bland, simple songs about love and disappointment. I guess sort of ever has it been thus, and then there's all the bands that are writing the more complex stuff, and so you think, Pink Floyd. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can't say they're not a commercially successful band, but it's a sort of darker sound for sure,
Yeah.
And but at the time, I guess they were. I don't know. There's just this sort of foreground background thing, I think, and So I don't think the 80s was particularly more superficial or more shiny, bright plastic than any other time. In a way, what I think is perhaps the bands that were more interesting in the 80s did come to the mainstream more easily. There was more variety. There was, and there wasn't such a divide as there was in the 70s between pop bands and underground bands, as they were called then, or as there are now between sort of commercial chart bands and indie bands. Do you know what I mean?
They moved back and forth more easily in the 1980s. For what reason, do you think?
Well, I think maybe the punk revolution in this country really freed up things a lot. Made, everyone, punk, although the bands were very, like, by modern standards, alternative, they were very mainstream, and it was a very kind of fashion era-defining kind of thing, do you know what I mean? But the music was pretty dark, I suppose, and challenging, even, a band like Joy Division or something like that, who you wouldn't possibly classify as a punk band exactly, but it had this aggressive, homemade, edgy kind of thing going on, it certainly wasn't like One Direction, but it was still very much, a kind of era-defining stuff, and right there in the foreground, So I think the 80s there was a legacy of that in a way, and bands like Tears for Fears and Us and maybe Howard Jones, Human League and stuff. I think we were all flirting around with jazzy chords and complex arrangements and, melodies, that sort of, were independent, and we had this, it was maybe one of the first eras as well where we were looking back at the Beatles and all the great songwriters. Well, maybe all musicians do that, I know there's this sort of public sense in a way that pop reinvents itself every decade and stuff. But in a way, maybe it just recycles itself every decade, and all the people who are really doing interesting things are inspired by the people who did really interesting things before them, so,
I think that the word that comes to mind now when I think of those first couple of Wang Chung albums is what sets it apart is the music has a sort of this tinge of uneasiness to it that makes it interesting. Does that resonate with you at all?
I'd like to think that it had that. Yeah.
Is that a mood you wanted to evoke at the time? Like, let's wrong foot people a little bit so they remember what they're hearing.
Yeah, I think a lot of my interest in, having been to music college and had a bit of a think about what being a composer means. The reason I chose to work in rock music, and there were certain practical reasons why I chose it, but a lot of it was this sense that, you could write music and have commercial success, but under the radar, you could sneak in some pretty radical ideas, and you could also experiment quite freely musically, with stuff, and in a way that you couldn't in other more structured genres, So in other words, when I left music college, I was really interested in Stockhausen and, ambient music, Steve Reich and stuff, But, those areas are quite sort of, what should we say, very, very defined. And I guess the social networks are very closed around them and stuff, whereas with rock music it was much more open. And, you were using similar technology, but trying to communicate with this big mass audience.
Right.
It was just interesting, stimulating to try and channel your creativity into that.
Take your baby by the hand and make her do a handstand. Take your baby by the heel and do the next thing that you feel. We were tough in place in a dance hall dance. We will go on craze in a dance hall dance. Take your
And I love pop music as well. I was listening to the radio a couple of days ago. Tracy Thorn was talking about her work, which I think she's written a sort of biography or autobiography or whatever, And the interviewer was sort of saying, like, it must be more satisfying now to be able to express yourself in a sort of grown-up medium and not be trying to cram it all into a 3-minute pop song, which she sort of tacitly agreed with. And I thought, you should defend yourself because it's damn hard to, write a 3-minute pop song effectively. I mean, it's an amazing discipline, and it's so undervalued. I think, it's, I think there will be a time when people look back on this golden age, but right now, I don't know, people seem to be just a bit jaded with it all, I guess.
There's this sense this taps into that you're writing a 3-minute pop song for a mass audience. You're working under a number of constraints because of that, but also in certain eras because of the corporate apparatus you're probably working under. And, there's the whole thing with constraints. From constraints come art. Without constraints, you don't have much. You see, if you watch a movie that doesn't set up any rules for itself, you might as well watch a test pattern or static. The same with music. If music has, this is especially true of improvised music. If there's no rules at all, you're not going to end up with much of value. But, you're working with the quartet. You've got to impose some rules. You can't just work with pop music's rules, right? It's imposition of rules has got to be a decent chunk of the work there.
It kind of is, yeah. It's quite interesting. When I sat down with Ornette Coleman's album, which is free jazz, and I thought, okay, this is going to be just completely random stuff, and it isn't. It's because the drums are going ting ting to ting, and the bass is playing, what jazz bass and drums do. Everyone else is pretty free over the top. But again, playing free jazz is limited by the fact that you can't play consonant chords and sort of tunes and stuff. Do you know what I mean? So you're right. Yeah, every kind of I'm going to avoid the word genre and say every mode of musical expression, is a question of dealing with different parameters, different rules.
What won't I do?
Yeah, and manipulating them in an interesting way, And pop music, in a sense, is one of the most kind of rule-bound areas, especially when it comes to playing the commercial game, and so manipulating that, trying to get a kind of dark message across, is fascinating, So like To Live and Die in LA, it's a pretty dark song, Dance All Days is actually a pretty dark song
for a dark movie, but Dance All Days as well, which is the big hit here. Although I suspect there's something English about that. Do you think it's something in the English character? They like a song that's ostensibly nostalgic, but also just sort of, I don't know, how would you, there's a layer of the nostalgic, but then a layer of just regret. I don't know. How do you think of Dance All Days now? Because I'll say this, you have a remix on Tazer Up. Yes. So it's a song that you haven't been able to avoid hearing. Sure. I'm sure you come across it on the radio, and that's had to have been, that has to be, I don't know whether that's still weird to hear it at this distance on the radio, but
it was nice to hear it.
Nice. Revisiting it for the new album, what did that bring back to you?
We revisit it every time we play a set,
And there is that as well. Yeah. But the recording, it's your voice from the early '80s on the remix.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It isn't actually. It's from the re-record.
Re-recorded. Okay.
We did. Yeah.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I did that, when I re-sang it, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, I was kind of, went to the session sort of thinking, like, God, this is going to be pretty difficult, actually. I'm going to have to listen to that recording in a lot of detail and I just, they put the track up and I sang it and that was it. Right. Because I've sung it so many times, I suppose. Right. And I guess that song, perhaps more than the others, is very based around the quirks of the way I sing anyway.
Right.
And I just couldn't stop myself singing it the way I'd always sung it. It was a bizarre feeling, actually.
You could hardly make yourself sing it another way.
Exactly right. It's kind of embedded in here, as they say on the Trogs tape. No, it's just a sort of, it feels like a sort of, like a path I've walked so many times, do you know what I mean? And having said that, the vocal on the re-record is subtly different from the original version, just because of the live experience of singing it. you know,
Right.
and there are certain things I do live, you know, that have now become part of the way I hear that vocal and stuff, you know. But it's interesting with pop music how fixed certain details become, you know, rather like classical music, you know. There's a text, if you like, that is very, very fixed.
Right.
And you know, contrary to this idea that pop music's all spontaneous and stuff, you know, it isn't.
Yes, no kidding. Tell me a little bit about the experience of revisiting, doing live shows again, playing these songs again. I mean, how long had it been since you played them when you began playing shows again in the 2000s?
Well, 2009, I guess, you know, aside from this little kind of radio tour that we did in 1997, it would have been, nearly 20 years since we'd done a Wang Chung show. You know?
Yes. How did that feel to just to pick it up again, to pick up specifically the live stuff, just playing the songs, looking at the catalog, thinking, what are we gonna bring out here?
Yeah. I guess at that distance of time, it was interesting, you know, and there's a sort of, what should we say, a kind of workmanlike thing, craftsmanship thing, you know, that comes to, you know, how do we play this? How do we, you know, I think, you know, back in the 80s we were using sequencers and really trying to recreate the record in every detail, you know, which was
seems a strange thing to be doing now.
but completely natural back then, you know, that's what you would, you know, the record was the thing and the live performance was like a sort of pale attempt to replicate it.
Maybe this will sell some records if we play the record exactly, which just sounds bizarre and evidence.
Yeah, now it's completely thought of the other way round, you know, although, as we were saying before we started recording, you know, I'm a firm believer that the records are better than the real thing. And for all sorts of reasons. But yeah, no, it was revisiting those tracks. It was, like sort of excavating sort of an archaeological site sort of thing, you know, and certain things that work, certain things that, you know, I sort of thought, well, not so important and stuff, you know. And I think, you know, the experience of playing live over this 4 or 5 years that we've been doing these summer tours in the States has been one of really getting into the fact that it's really not about specific details. It's much more about the connection with the audience, you know, and this kind of dance that you have with them, you know, which is, on quite a sort of strange level in a way, you know, but
Tell me about the pressures there that from the audience, other than I want to hear the hits. I mean, there's always going to be those people, but you've also got people like me who hope for some album cut that would never, you know, I'm trying to think of it, something off of, say, an album you don't play live, or, you know, I mean, there's a few different directions from which your feeling demands, right? Sometimes contradictory.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when we started out, there was a definite sense of, you know, working with the most popular songs, you know, and then throwing in some of the new stuff as well. So that's kind of how our live set was, you know. But
so if I'm there and I shout out "Rising in the East," do you guys play it?
But I kind of think now, you know, I kind of like to sort of redevise the set. Actually, you know, I'm not sure what we're going to do this year, whether we're going to do any touring because of various things that are happening. But once we sort of go out again, I kind of like to restructure the set actually and do some of the more sort of lesser known stuff in a way. You know, I'd really like to play "City of the Angels" actually, the instrumental track off of "To Live and Die in LA," and you know, do some of the kind of edgier stuff, you know, and you know, work that in. You know, I mean, obviously, when people buy a ticket for a Wang Chung show, they do want to hear everybody have fun tonight, and I'm more than happy to play that.
Those 3.5 minutes.
Yes. But I think it'd be nice to sort of emphasise that darker side that you're talking about, you know, is more manifest in certain songs, and I think people get into that. I know, you know, commercially people are wary of that. You know, people want light, happy, bright.
But you don't feel the light unless you have the dark in the album as well.
True. And also, I think people like dark. You know, there's a whole load of people who do. You know, so let's have some of that.
The light and the shade on the album, ideally, and I think Tazer Up has that. Yeah. You mentioned the instrumental tracks on the "To Live and Die in LA" soundtrack, and it always struck me as a fascinating example of a Wang Chung album because there were instrumentals as well as songs with lyrics, and Is it something you consider returning to with Wang Chung now that maybe doing what you do with the quartet perhaps siphons off your desire to do instrumentals in that direction? But is that, I don't know if that's a possible meeting point between the two halves of your recording career. Do you think of it that way at all?
Well, I do think that that the trick I've been trying to pull off since I started really was pulling together these two tendencies of the long form instrumental prog jazz thing, and the short form pop song Beatles thing, and sort of creating this sort of hybrid that would satisfy both things, Probably can never do that, but yeah, that's all part of the things that I see. Oddly enough, the latest stuff I've been writing with the quartet are songs, actually. It goes back to what we were talking about with the iPhone. It was a friend of mine asked me if I would work with this poet guy called Kelvin Corcoran. He's a fantastic poet and very established in this country, actually, insofar as being a poet's a career.
Right.
He's got one, sort of relatively outside of academia as well, which is unusual, But he's a great writer, and he sent me his book, or one of his books anyway, which I sort of opened up, and he lives part of the year in Greece, and a lot of his poetry is about Greek myth and stuff, and it's not easy to set sort of some of those Greek terms into pop music and stuff. Well, I suppose I was thinking more jazz and stuff, but anyway, to cut a long story short, this book sat on my piano for a month or so. One Saturday afternoon, I sort of opened it up, and there were these series of poems, 6 poems called A Thesis on the Ballad, where he was basically writing this sort of strange pastiche of like old English ballads, talking about Lord Randall and the sort of birds singing in the trees, and this sort of medieval vision of Britain, like sort of a bit Canterbury, a bit Chaucer sort of thing, Yes. And anyway, I sort of got an idea for the first song straight away, and sort of was at the piano sort of writing it down and stuff. And then immediately I got the idea for the next song, and within 2 hours I'd written all 6 songs.
Wow.
Which
2 hours?
Which for me is really unusual. It takes usually, at least a few days to feel I've got a song together, And but I felt, this is a really spontaneous thing, and we've performed them a couple of times here in Canterbury at various things, and people are really into it. I mean, they're powerful songs, I think, And I've subsequently written a set of songs to another bunch of poems, which are a lot heavier, really. But these are things that I want to put out for the quartet, probably towards the end of the year. There's a bit of a backed up set of recordings, really, with the quartet. So we're going to release the other stuff first. I won't go into all the detail of that, but it's just interesting working with with Kelvin, and the technology that we were talking about before, being able to sort of record on the spot, really, and to sort of sit at the piano and just jam out some chords and sing the word, the words are there, and getting the sort of resonance of them, and capturing that in a spontaneous way, as opposed to carrying it around in your head for days and then trying to translate it.
Hoping you retain it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It sounds as if these new recordings align well with whatever the modern Canterbury sound is. Maybe that's it.
Yes, I think so. There is a tradition there, I think, and definitely I'm feeling a part of that, and that's kind of nice to feel rooted in a way, I know you and I were both saying we like to feel like we're outsiders. But maybe as an artist you need to be inside something,
Partially inside, partially outside. I mean, even with Wang Chung, I mean, I have to imagine you always felt outside the pop world to some extent, at least 1 foot outside it.
Yeah. I think, Wang Chung is very much an outsider band in so many ways, So no, that's an important part of it, I think. But it's just, for me, it's just always being aware of the bigger picture, in a sense, the bigger territory, and I guess having listened to music in a sort of, what's the word, analytical way, I suppose, for so many years. There's a lot that's on in, and so creatively there's a lot of experience, in a sense, that still to come out.
And much that you hear when you hear other music. You're hearing, you could sit down in front of a One Direction song and probably hear a bit more than the average One Direction fan, arguably.
Possibly or possibly not, in my case.
They do imbue it with certain meanings that, you wouldn't necessarily if you weren't of that cohort, shall we say.
Sure, yeah. But the that pop music language, or music language, let's get rid of those genres again, It is a sort of a language that functions, with certain rules of, rules is a horrible word, I hate that, It's
Well, what can we replace it with?
Well, a mechanism maybe or something, It's, the relationship of C to G to G7 to F to, it's the same whether you're listening to an early Mozart symphony or One Direction. So, it's only later that things get more, complex and so, but it's the same basic mechanism.
And whether you're doing a Wang Chung song or a piece with the quartet, you're not speaking different languages, you're maybe speaking different dialects. That's as far as we can take it.
You could put it like that, absolutely, yeah. And as I say, I think my sort of quest, is trying to pull those two things together somehow, So maybe I think with, especially this last tour we did, but we had a really rocking band actually, and we were improvising a bit more on the songs, so. And a couple of people came up to me and said, "Wow, you guys are real musicians, aren't you?" And I thought, yeah, that's what I want people to think of Wang Chung as, as musicians, And
a simple designation, yet such a one to savor.
Yeah. And maybe with the quartet, we want to be thought of as celebrities,
Yes, cross the boundaries from every direction. I've been speaking here in Canterbury with Jack Hues. He's a founding member of Wang Chung and of the Quartet. Wang Chung's latest album is Tazer Up, and the Quartet has got a new one coming out sometime this year. Jack, thanks so much.
Thank you, Colin. It's been a pleasure.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kodlubowski, Peter Kavanagh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Blosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Traher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, Dion Wolf, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.